Today we're working on my KHS Montana Crest. This is from the mid-80s. I can't find the exact year, but 85, 86, somewhere around there. It's missing some of the top tube decal on the drive side, and the paint has a few chips and stuff, but the yellow still looks really cool. It's not terribly faded or anything, just looks really nice. I really like yellow 80s bikes. So it's a nice chromoly tubed bike, and it's got lugs as well, which is pretty cool. I do like this 80s KHS font, looks quite nice. Has a Suntour group set as well as Diacomp brakes, so some nice parts on it. Didn't really know how to build this bike up, so I've just been riding it as is until sort of I had a bit of a feel or a handlebar or something that I really wanted to try, and then I can throw that at it. But it's just rocking 3x6 setup. The rear wheel isn't stock, so that's just a Joytech steel hub, but it does have the factory freewheel, which is pretty cool. So I'm guessing that front wheel would have been stock, so a rear rim with the SR hub. So the rear is not matching anymore, but might be able to find one, or at least a more suitable wheel set. Comes with this rear rack as well, which is pretty cool. So I had it in my head that I would probably just try a riser bar or something with a bit of back sweep to it. But after riding it for a while and stuff, I sort of thought that the handlebars were up a little bit too high. And I've always wanted to try the Nitto RM3 handlebar, which is sort of like their old school style dirt drop bar. The bike also has a stand. So eventually I ended up buying the Nitto RM3. And this is it here. I just bought this from Blue Lug. It looks quite similar to the Specialized BB1 bar that came on the Rock Combo, but it's considerably wider, as you can see by these photos here. So that's the BB1 below it, and it's minuscule in comparison to the RM3, but the RM3 isn't really a wide handlebar by today's standards. It's certainly wide enough. I think it was about 42 or 44 at the hoods, and then 52 in the drops. So it does need a bit of maintenance, so the cables and everything will need to be replaced, so we're just going to cut those off. Then we'll go about stripping the rest of the bike down. Hopefully nothing's stuck, unlike that last bike. But I'm feeling good about it. First thing to come off with all the cables and everything, then we can get the handlebar out. I had tried a couple of different stems, so I know that wasn't going to be an issue getting that out. It is 21.1 though, which is pretty typical of 80s stuff. Decided to put a little bit of penetrating oil into the bottom bracket shell. Then we'll also put a couple of drops on the spindle. Although in the past I've had really good luck with unsealed bottom brackets and removing cranks from them. I don't know if it's because the grease sort of works its way out and then covers the spindle in grease as well, so the rust doesn't build up as much, or if it's just coincidence, but either way, it's a good sign. This headset came undone as well, although there was a spacer missing, so the top nut had a little gap, but that's okay. We can just put a spacer in when we go to reassemble it. Brakes came off okay, a little bit of a tug, and the crank bolt as well, or the crank nut, I guess you would say. I'm just making sure there's no washer in there. It can be a bit of an issue. Getting pedals. I had to put the bike on the ground to get the pedals off. Just wanted to crack them loose really, but ended up taking them all off. Then just gently doing the crank removal tool up. And sure enough, the crank arm popped off, revealing a whole bunch of grease from the unsealed unit. Which is, I really like seeing that, because then there's not going to be a whole lot of rust around the bottom bracket shell, which is one of the prime parts that rusts out. Normally, because all the water and everything sort of works its way down inside the frame, regardless of sort of if you ride through water or not, just condensation forms inside of steel tubes, right? It's just one of those things with the heating and cooling effect of everything, pretty much. We did have to bolt the bottom bracket tool down to get the drive side out, because it just had those flat relief sections on it, so kind of tricky to keep that on, but it all came out. We're missing some balls though.
There's my balls. I found them.
But we found them in the bottom bracket shell. And after giving it a wipe out, you can see why I like unsealed bottom brackets. Because all the grease goes everywhere and then you don't have any rust. And there's also grease on the outside too, so once we clean that off, there should be no rust under there. Unlike this gear cable that's stuck in the rear derailleur because of a bit of rust. Worst comes to worst, we can just replace that barrel adjuster, but we might be able to get that out. I think we might put the rear rack back on. I don't really like how these bosses are on the inside of the seat stays, but it's not really the end of the world. I do quite like a rear rack, but most of my bikes tend to have front baskets, because I think using a basket is so much easier than a rear rack. Like if you have a pannier bag or like a trunk bag or something like that. But even so. So with the bike all stripped down, we could see it needed a bit of a clean up. I don't really want to do any touch-ups to the paint though, just keep the patina as is. But before we get around to that, we've got to take apart some of the components so we can deal to the rust on them. So the derailleur bolt and a few parts on the rear derailleur that will need to go into vapor rust, but the brake components, they look like we can just clean those up. The crank bolts are in good order as well, so I don't need to do those. The headset pieces though will probably have to go into their vapor rust. So some little bits of rust and on the top nut as well. And this is the lower headset cup. So we'll disassemble the rear derailleur and then put all those parts into some degreaser before we put them in a vapor rust. So the jockey wheels are in good order, which is good. They're the stock derailleur wheels as well. Pretty cool. So just using a magnet to make sure that we don't lose that circlip before taking out the spring and derailleur bolt. We can pretty easily clean this with the derailleur like all assembled, but you never know what kind of rust is going to be inside like the assembly there, so by taking it out we can re-grease it when we put it all back together. So we're just putting in some degreaser first so we can wipe it all off before putting it in a vapor rust. Obviously if it's got like a film of oil and grease and stuff, the vapor rust is not going to do anything. So this is going into the vapor rust now for a day or two. I think I left it for 2 days because that's just when it worked out, when I was free next, but normally just overnight's good enough. We'll clean up the frame now. Just, it needed quite a bit of cleaning. That was just a screwdriver with a rag in there. Then once it's all cleaned up, we can go through and kill some of the rust on it. So on the 9 drive side, there's a bit of a big scratch there on the top tube. Just going to use this as an example. So this is a rust converter. This is what I use if I don't want to like respray the bike, but I just want to stop the rust from forming any further. And some little spots on the top tube on the drive side. So this basically goes to a primered surface. You can paint it or just leave it as is from there. A couple of days later, I pulled everything out from the vapor rust. What? That came up so much better than I thought. I've used vapor rust a lot of times, and sometimes it still really amazes me. I don't know how it does it. I know vinegar and stuff does a pretty good job too, but yeah, pretty amazing. The top nut and everything looks really good too. The bigger parts and everything, I use some clear coat to seal them just so they don't further rust from there. I just use satin clear coat because I think I got a few cans on special one time, but gloss clear coat would be better. These are the parts all rust converted now. So if you do go over onto the paint and stuff, you can sort of just scratch that off and it'll come off. So now it's time to polish up the frame. So there's a few parts, or a lot of it actually has a bunch of scuff marks and everything. And you can see the clear coat has sort of lost some of its shine. So by smoothing the paint out, it should pop a little bit better. And after a bit of a quick buff, you can see, yeah, it's got some of its gloss back, which is pretty cool to see. I didn't really want it to be immaculate. I think the 80's bikes look really nice with a bit of patina on them. And that's the non-drive side part that is all rust converted now too. Then after that, I use some wax as well, just to seal it and sort of prevent it from dulling in the future. These are just like automotive things. I can't remember if it's turtle wax. It's Maguire's wax actually. Works really well. After that, cleaning up the headset, I just used some degreaser. It was pretty dry, so there wasn't too much grease in there, to be honest. And then just giving a bit of a wipe out. So you can see there's a very light amount of surface rust on the headset. It's not really going to cause any issues once we put some new grease back on there. Reinstalling that lower headset cup once the paint had dried on it. Just a little bit of grease in there and then tighten that down. After that, we can go through and grease the headset bearings and then install the headset. So it's got the top one in there, making sure there's a decent amount of grease in there. This is loading up the lower one, so just use your finger and sort of push it in there like that. I like to go around with a little bit of grease, and that sort of seals it to the cup. I really like when a manufacturer will paint the stereo tube. Sometimes it's just like a little bit of overspray or something, but then the rest of it is covered in like surface rust. But this was actually painted, and then they clear coated that stereo tube as well, which is really cool to see. You can sort of see in the threads there's like it looks like there's like a little bit of primer through there, so they must like cut the fork, thread it, and then paint it. The paint and the threads didn't do anything to it, but now it's time to kill all the nubs. I hate these nubs, so I just filed them off. They destroy so many stereo tube threads that now I'm on a mission to remove all of the nubs. Yeah, fight me, I don't care. Get rid of the nubs. Especially if you've got like a couple of lock rings. Yeah, you really don't need that nub. The nub is basically, it's just like a locating washer, and that can sort of resist the upper headset cup sort of rotating when you're tightening it down, but you just hold it, it's fine. The brake levers we're using on the bike are Suntour Cyclone, which I picked up locally quite recently, and they look amazing. And I really wanted some nice Suntour brake levers, but they don't show up often, so I jumped on them. The shifters we're using are these old Suntour bar end shifters. Really like the feeling of these. They have like the micro ratchet in them. Really cool feeling gear shifter. I use these ones on my Specialized rock combo as well, just because I really like the feel of them. Pretty simple to assemble and disassemble. Just one bolt holding the whole ratchet mechanism. Then there's just one screw that sort of covers up the little pawl and spring in there as well. Like most bar end shifters, you sort of do them anti-clockwise. They're a reverse thread. You do them anti-clockwise to tighten them. You can just oil these a little bit through the gap here, but I decided to show you it without the cover on as well. So that's it. Just a little ratchet, a little spring and pawl and stuff. Really simple, really. Don't really need much maintenance. I would just put a light drop of oil in there just to prevent rust and stuff. Although I guess technically if you oil it, then that oil will hold dust eventually. But I'd rather have the oil in there just to prevent it from rusting. After that, I sort of took the bike out of the stand and then put the shifters and everything in the place that I wanted them, and then just marked them there.
Oh, it keeps.
From here we'll go through and clean up the brakes. So the brake pads definitely need replacing. As you can see there, just worn on an angle. I'm guessing no one's adjusted the toe for a while. These are quite a simple brake. They don't have any height adjustment, but they do have these spherical cone washers. So that adjusts like the toe in and everything. So you can adjust the angle of them and the toe, but you just can't adjust the height. Unlike some of the other die-comp brakes, but should still work really well. Just need a bit of a cleanup, so we're just going through with a little bit of degreaser and the toothbrush. Quite cool looking brakes, really. Give them a bit of a polish up on the bench polisher. Not too much though. And then we'll go through the hardware as well. It's the same sort of thing. You want to be kind of careful. But yeah, no real issues cleaning that up. It came up quite nicely as well. That's most of the parts all done. There's a couple little nuts and stuff that we still need to do, but I'll show you sort of how to do those in a sec. Assembling some of the brake. There's only a few parts to these, so cone washer and then another little washer before the nut goes back on. Then that's the pad washer. So basically there's a little dome nut and you can just sort of attach that to a bolt and then use that bolt in the polisher. So the brake anchor bolt gets a little polish up and that came out really nicely. I don't know if those were chromed at one point, but yeah, quite a nice looking bolt really. A little bit of grease and then putting the brake calipers back on. Nice snug fit, but not too bad. Not too stiff, I should say. A little bit of Loctite on the brake bolts, especially on the front brake. You really don't want those coming undone accidentally. Moving on to the cranks now. You can see they've lost a bit of their shine. The chainrings look in pretty good condition, just a little bit greasy and stuff. Although considering these are from the 80s, they're in pretty good condition. I think we'll be able to use these with a new chain. They don't have any major like shark toothing or burring over on the edges, so should be alright. Just disassembling them so we can give it a really good cleanup. Then I think we'll polish the cranks up as well. Make them match the brakes, and then we'll try and polish up the derailleurs as well. So those cleaned up really nicely. Then moving over to polish the crank arm. You can fill in a little bit of the embossing on the crank arm as well. I was thinking of doing some yellow, but I kind of just want to keep it sort of original. So I just left that with raw. But they came up quite nicely. I didn't do any sort of pre-polishing work, so I didn't sand them at all. So you can see like some little spots of oxidization and some sort of deeper scratches. You can get those out if you really wanted to, but you would have to do polishing, so you'd sanding, sorry. So you'd have to do some sanding up in stages, you know, start at like a 600 grit, work your way up to 1200 and then polish it. Sealing the crank arms, you can use clear coat. I just tend to use wax. This isn't enough wax for 2 or 3 crank arms, but it's just what's squirted out of the container there. So yeah, I don't use clear coat on crank arms anymore because it looks awful when it starts to peel off, because really a polished surface just isn't going to hold clear coat too well. Something that isn't going to have anything rub up against it, you know, like a stem or something like that, will probably be a bit better. But crank arms, I just polish them every now and then. Yeah, it's not worth clear coating in my opinion. Using a little bit of anti-seize in the bottom bracket shell, and then we put in the non-drive side and then go through, do the drive side before putting the crank arms on. Before this point, if you're going to put any rust inhibitor inside the frame, you should have done that by now. I didn't show it on camera, it's too hard to show, but I use Penetrol. It's just a rust prevention. You can use, you know, like there's 100 different kinds of rust prevention you can put inside a frame, but you want something kind of oily that's going to spread around inside the frame quite easily. So getting those nice and snugged up. I do use a little bit of grease on the tapers, but just a very thin amount, you can see there. Going into the wheels now. This rear wheel is incredibly heavy. It's a whole kilogram heavier than the replacement that I found for it. So unfortunately, I couldn't find a matching one for the front wheel in my stash. But these are the wheels from the Hard Rock. And these are actually the tires that I wanted to use as well, which is awfully convenient. So the Hard Rock that I did last year was a single speed bike. So we are going to have to change the dishing and the spacers on the axle, because we're going to want that 6-speed freewheel back on instead of just a single cog. And also the frame spacing on the KHS is different to what was on the Hard Rock. So the KHS frame is about a 125 spacing, and the Hard Rock was 130, I think. I could be wrong. So obviously the hub is still in really good condition. It hasn't had too much use, so even the grease was like in mint condition. You can see the Suntour dropouts on the bike now too, which is cool. Taking the original freewheel off that old wheel. So I just use the freewheel tool in the vise, and then just use the wheel as the leverage, as you do. The freewheel has quite a nice sound to it. So this is the spacer off the original wheel that came on the bike. Not the original wheel, but it's the one that came on it. So we need to adjust the space and everything of the axle. So we need to just loosen that and then put it into the frame. Just want to make sure that the axle's not going to come out too far past the dropout. We can have it past a little bit because the quick release skewer has a little bit of a relief in it, but don't want it too far out. From there we can do the drive side. And then we can sort of go back and forth to get the axle in the spot that we want it to. So just doing up the drive side now, making sure that's all tight. Spins nice and smoothly. Then we'll check that in the frame. Feels pretty good. Just a little bit of spring out. And you can see here that the wheel does need to go over towards the drive side. So we just need to undo the non-drive side spokes and then tighten up the drive side ones, and that'll pull it over.
The one full rotation.
And that's it moved over with one full rotation. So you can see sort of how far it moved over. I do have this other freewheel. This is a Suntour Perfect. This is just a 5-speed, but it's a really wide range. So the freewheel that came on the bike, I'm guessing this is the factory one, the 6-speed. It does look pretty worn, so I don't know if this is going to hold a new chain, just going by the wear on it and everything. We are going to put this on though, because I don't have the tool to remove that Suntour Perfect. The Suntour Perfect one was just a 2-prong Suntour freewheel tool, and I don't have that. I've got a few different freewheel tools, but I feel like every freewheel I get is a different tool. I do have this Suntour quick release in my parts bin, which is really cool. But unfortunately I don't have a rear one, so we just use this Shimano one on the rear. Tighten that in. Onto the rear derailleur, we'll polish this up a little bit. I don't know if I want to go over that part in the center there, just because it has all the lettering still there. And I like Suntour stuff. It's not like the Dura-Ace cranks where I don't care too much about them. So Suntour, we've got to keep that there. We've got to represent the Suntour, you know. So cleaning up the derailleur, and then we'll go through and polish it. I realized I can just sort of be careful with the Dremel and go around all the lettering and everything, and that should clean it up quite nicely. So this is just with a little polishing bit, and we're going to use a bit of Autosol. So we just want to smear on the autosole, spread it around and everything, and then we'll go over with the Dremel. Just want to keep moving it, otherwise you're going to end up with little swirl marks, and it's just going to be all weird basically, because the Dremel tool is so small that it can look uneven if you don't keep moving. So just being careful around the letters and everything. Just don't want to, because one little hit with that tool at a couple thousand RPM is just going to blow straight through those letters. It came out quite nicely. So you can see the factory pulleys have nice little, I really like the old Suntour font. Looks really cool. So just cleaning up the pulley wheels now, and then we'll go through and reassemble the red derailleur. Got the nice cleaned up bolt and everything. Then we can put the spring back in, and then we can put the derailleur bolt back in as well. This is kind of tricky to get in, but we got it in there, and clicks it back all the way down, then we can put that circlet back on. Kind of tricky to get that all in, but gets there in the end. Got a nice amount of spring back there too. There's actually 2 holes in this derailleur that you can put the spring into. We got lucky though. Just putting the front derailleur and the front wheel back on. And then we can go through. I didn't actually know which pedals to put on this bike up until I found these ones, and then I just serviced these and I painted the cages up. So for some reason I really get hung up on what pedals to put on a bike. I like wider and bigger pedals, but those tend to be like more modern. I kind of tend towards bear trap pedals because they're a bit bigger, but they look quite old school. So bear traps would have been cool on this as well, but we didn't have any, and it was too late for me to want to buy some. So we ended up servicing these ones and putting these on. They're like an XT sort of style, basically. Throwing the chain on now. Just got this new Shimano one. Only downside to these Shimano chains is they use the snap-off rivet instead of a quick link. Although it's probably stronger. But we ended up cutting the chain in a spot to use one of the existing rivets anyway. This seems to work on 8-speed chains, but 9 and up you can't really reuse the rivets again. Oh no, with that said, I did repair someone's 9-speed chain, and I have done before, and it's held up okay. But long term, I wouldn't really recommend it for 9-speed and up. But 8-speed and lower, it seems fine. So just putting it back in, and then we can snap that pin back into place. I just use some poly grips just to push it through. And then once it's through most of the way, we can use the chain tool and push it through. You just want to even both sides. It can take a bit of trying to get it in the right spot. And then once it's through, it'll be a little bit stiff, but then just sort of bend it. And then it'll be good as new. Except not good as new. It was at this point where I realized that we can't put the chain rings on the way that I wanted them to. So I swapped them back around, and now the offset's in the right spot, so there's no more chain rub. From here it was just a few little steps. Got to do the cables and the bar tape and the seat, and that's about all. So cutting the cables to length. I run the rear brake on the right hand side, although most Kiwis run them on the left. I just like that because I'm right-handed and it feels good for wheelies. So this stem does have a cable stop in it, but I decided to use a fork-mounted cable stop, mostly because I want to run a front bag at times, and having the exposed cable inner going from the stem down to the brake kind of sucks. Also, I feel like these have a better brake lever feel anyway, so I try and use these when I can, but they're kind of hard to find, so yeah. So having that cable outer there, which means that the bag can rest up against it or flex it out of the way, and it's not going to change the brake feel at all. Hooking up the rear gear cable. Because it's friction shifted, it's pretty simple to do really. We just need to set the limit screws and then check that there's enough cable tension. Just going to throw a little bit of chain lube on and then run it through the gears. Gets to the high gear and gets all the way down to low. Quite like the sound of that freewheel. Yeah, very nice sounding. Moving on to the front brake, I just quickly set up the pads sort of where I think they should be. From there I do the straddle cable hanger, so sort of set that at about the right height, and then put the straddle cable through. With most Shimano cantilever brakes, this should be about 90 degrees, but with the touring or like the wide profile brake arms, it's a little bit different. It sort of just depends on more like where the pads sit and everything, and then the straddle cable sort of just finds its own angle. You don't want the yoke to be, or you don't want the cable hanger to be too high up, but also you don't want it to be too low where it's going to cause an issue with, you know, the tire or the fender or anything like that. So around about there, it looks pretty good. Making sure it's all centered and everything, pulling the arms evenly. Feeling quite nice. Cut the cables and then put some cable ends on. And then we'll move on to tidying up the seat post is next. So you can see there's a whole heap of scratches on there. I wouldn't really recommend it, but you can, once you've found about where you want the seat post to be, you can sort of sand off one side of it. So I polished that just one side up quite nicely. Yeah, that makes me feel better about it. And then throwing a Brooks B17 saddle on. I really like these seats, nice and comfy for me. This is quite a worn one, as you can tell by the brake, by the bolt here. And as with Brooks B17 saddles, or Brooks in general, you want the saddle to be angled back a little bit. Not quite this high, but it's just to sort of show. Yeah, so the seat post, you really don't want to sand a seat post because it's going to change the diameter of it. But if you measure sort of whereabouts you want the seat height to be, and you don't touch what's going to be inside the frame, it's not really going to be an issue for you. It'll be an issue for the next person though. So I wanted to create a bit of a shallower angle into the brake lever, and I do have these Nitto monkey bananas. They're sort of supposed to be on the inside of the curve of the drop bars, but you might be able to get them to work on brake hoods, but the ridge, like, they're a little bit too aggressive, so I wanted something a bit more shallow. So I just rolled up a little bit of bar tape and then put that under another section of bar tape and taped that in place. So you won't really be able to see it here, but there's a little rolled up, like right in the bend, and then, or right in the corner I should say, and then I put some bar tape over the top of that too. The handlebar tape we're using is from Blue Log, and it's their grey tape. I was having a hard time trying to figure out what kind of handlebar tape I wanted on this bike, and after consulting with some greater minds than mine, I came to the conclusion that grey was the right choice. I didn't want to go too crazy color-wise on this bike because the yellow pops so much. I really didn't want to detract from that, so after putting on the grey, I'm really, really happy with it. Would not have changed to another handlebar tape or other colour. So with the bar end shifters, you need the cable to come out at some point. I sort of just follow what the natural curve of the gear cable is, and then just let it exit the handlebar tape where that curve sort of starts. Going upwards towards the brake lever, you can see here I already have that extra section around the lever clamp. But because it's the narrow like cotton, you can sort of see it's got some exposed parts there. Yeah, right there and there. It's a bit exposed. So basically what I did to prevent that is I just did 2 widths of it. And you can sort of see there. So it's just 2 little strips instead of 1. That covers up everything, and on the back side as well. So I couldn't find any replacement hoods for these levers. Nothing local anyway. There might be some overseas, but it'll take a few weeks and cost $100, so bar tape it is. Wrapping up further, just want to keep it nice and even, nice and taut as well. I didn't put any extra padding on the tops because I don't really sit on the tops too much. I really like the feel of nice thin cotton tape, although I have quite big hands, but I just really like the feel and the texture of it. Cutting straight in towards the handlebar now, just to finish off that tape. We don't want to cover the nitto up, but I just wanted to do like a little test to make sure that the angle is right. And after that I could cut it back further, about to where I wanted it to stop. And then we just wrap that with some insulation tape or something. And that's pretty much all done. I like going a little step further here and wrapping that again with some hemp twine. I just really like the look of it. It's quite simple to do once you've done it a couple of times. Basically just wrap it. There's some really good instructions online, but you just wrap it around once with a bit of extra hanging out there, and then sort of wrap over the extension. You can see I'm trying to get the little extension part tucked under. Then wrapping over the top of it. Then you want to wrap until you're about 3/4 of the way down. Then you want to start wrapping over like a loop, basically. Then just keep going over that. So you'll leave a little bit of the twine coming up through itself. And then once you've got basically to the end where you want to stop, you want to push it through that loop and then pull on the part that's coming up through the center of it. And that sort of tucks in the end underneath itself. And when it's just underneath it, you want to trim that off and then pull it all the way under. And then you can snip that off as well. Some people go through and use some shellac over the top of this, but I just like to leave it as is. You can use like some wax or something as well if you'd like. Just some beeswax or something. But that'll age and wear just nicely without it. That's the handlebar tape all done. And that's the bike all done. For now, we're not going to ride it with the rack on. I just wanted to ride it as is. And it looks so good. I'm really happy with it. I'm going to take it out for a bit of a ride now, but I'll talk a bit about it at the end of the video, and I will see you then.
tyres on this sort of terrain.
So this was the first ride that we did with the bike, and not to brag, but somebody complimented it, and pretty much the first person that I saw with the bike, which is really funny to see. I really like the setup. It's not too overstated, but it's, dare I say, it's kind of classy, even though, you know, it's white tires and everything. I feel like it looks really good. Bit of patina and stuff just shows a bit of the age and the character of the bike. It's done some hard yards, but it's got many more in the future. This is a beautiful little lookout on the pipeline track up in Titirangi, which is just a couple of minutes up the road from me. So this is my local track. I really like riding along it. It was pretty busy on the day that I went up here. It was a public holiday, so not the best time to do some filming, but I really wanted to show it to you. So I hope you like it. We're going to take it through the bush a little bit and see how these tires do over some wet roads and stuff. Thought I'd try out some little drop bar wheelies. And I was actually pretty surprised that I got a couple of pedal strokes on. This is some really rough little grass here, but got some nice slow wheelies, which I was really happy with.
Really like this mid-80s era KHS. Like the rear end's not super short, but still nimble. You can wheel it decently. Forks have a nice little curve to them, and they're skinny at the bottom, so a bit of flex to them. On your left. Thank you. And controls. good as well. Need suspension up there, but I do see people riding full suspensions and like e-bikes and stuff up here quite often. It's really more of a gravel ride. But they ride mountain bikes and then they go in like the smooth part over to the right, which is funky. What else to say about it? Friction shifting, obviously I love it. And the Sun Tour with its sort of power ratchet system as well. Feels awfully romantic. These tyres that you saw over the wet roots and stuff are really grippy. But also quick enough on the road for what I need them to do. They seem a little bit faster than the normal smoke dart. I don't know why that is. People think Specialized are probably my favourite bikes. You know, there's some merit to that. I really feel like KHS in the mid 80s. This is just a really nice riding bike. I can attach some racks and take it bike packing. I can ride it and commute it everywhere. I can probably fit fenders on it with these tyres. And just overall, just a bloody nice riding bike. The only thing that lets it down really is being 1 inch. Hey, yeah. So it's kind of harder to find a fork if you bend it in.
So overall, this is one of my favorite bikes that I've built and rode recently. The Specialized rock combo definitely handles a bit better, but I like the ride feel of this a bit more, even though the rock combo has better handling and the riding position is a little bit comfier on that. But this, I really like this, and being yellow as well is really cool. Don't have any other yellow bikes, and yellow is a really nice colour on bikes, especially 80s ones. Thanks for checking the video out. I've got a Schwinn High Sierra coming up soon. I'm just about to get started on that. Just waiting for a couple of last minute parts to show up, and then I'll get started on that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks. Bye.
A few little hydrant bumps. Oh, indeed, on the wrong side of the road.